The workshop was quiet, almost too quiet. The only sound was the soft tap of the human's boots against the wooden floor. Dust hung in the air, shining slightly in the weak light coming from a small window. Every corner of the room was filled with old tools, broken weapons, and armor that had not felt the touch of human hands for centuries. It smelled of metal, oil, and something older, something like forgotten history. The human walked carefully, their eyes scanning every detail. They had been given a strange assignment today, one that was unlike any they had faced before. Recreate ancient armor, the message had said. It was simple in words, but the task itself was anything but simple. This armor was legendary, known for battles long gone. Stories said it protected the greatest warriors, yet it also seen blood, sweat, and countless deaths. As the human approached the center of the workshop, their eyes fell on a large chest. It was old, covered in dust, and would look like it could crack under the slightest touch. A strange feeling ran through them, a mix of curiosity and unease. The chest seemed to call to them, almost whispering from the shadows. On the top of the chest, carved in faint letters, were words that made the humans stop in their tracks. "Do you want mine cleaned or bloodstained?" A shiver ran down their spine. The question was strange, almost mocking. The human knelt slowly, running their fingers along the worn carvings. Why would a simple chest ask such a question? Their heart beat faster, not from fear alone, but from the knowledge that whatever was inside could change everything. The human took a deep breath and opened the chest. The hinges creaked loudly, breaking the quiet like a sudden scream. Inside lay a set of armor, unlike anything they had ever seen. The metal was dark but polished, and faint scratches marked the surface. Some spots were shiny, as if recently cleaned, while others were dark, almost red. The human swallowed hard. This was no ordinary armor. It was ancient, powerful, and haunted by history. They reached out and touched the shoulder plate. The metal was cold, far colder than it should have been for its surroundings. For a moment, the human thought they felt a pulse, like a heartbeat trapped inside the metal. They pulled back quickly. "No, it can't be," they whispered to themselves. But something inside the room had changed. Shadows moved slightly, as if the light itself was afraid to touch the armor. The human looked around. The workshop had always been empty, yet now it felt alive. Tools rattled on the walls. A distant sound of footsteps echoed somewhere in the back. The human knew they were alone, but the noise continued. Their mind raced. Could it be the wind? Maybe. But something told them it was more. Taking a deep breath, the human focused on the task. The first step was to study the armor carefully. They lifted the chest out of the main box and placed it on a sturdy table. Every plate, every joint, every dent and scratch told a story. The shoulder piece had marks from a sword strike. The chest plate had a deep gouge, and the gauntlets had tiny cracks near the fingers. Each mark was a memory, a battle frozen in metal. Hours passed as the human examined the armor. They made sketches, notes, and measurements. Every detail was important. The human knew that if they missed even one mark, the recreated armor would lose its authenticity. But as the sun slowly moved across the sky, strange things continued to happen. Small pieces of metal would slide off their workbench on their own. A hammer would fall with a loud bang, though nothing touched it. Even the faint light from the window seemed to flicker, casting shadows that looked like figures moving across the walls. By evening, the human felt tired but determined. They had learned the armor secrets, at least as much as any human could. They leaned back in their chair, rubbing their eyes. The shadows in the room seemed to gather closer, almost watching. And then they heard it, a whisper, soft, almost a sigh. "Do you choose blood or honor?" The human froze. Their heart pounded loudly. They looked around, but no one was there. Only the armor and the chest remained. Yet the voice had sounded so real, so close. It was not threatening, not angry. It was waiting. The human could not understand how this could happen. The assignment was meant to be a simple creation task. But now it was something different, something alive. Shaking off the fear, the humans stood. They needed tools, materials, and a plan. Tomorrow, they would begin recreating the armor. But tonight, the human could not sleep. They kept returning to the strange question carved on the chest. Do you want mine cleaned or bloodstained? What did it mean? The night grew deeper. Outside, the wind whispered through cracks in the walls. Inside, the shadows danced. The human stayed awake, staring at the chest and armor, imagining the battles it had seen. Sword strikes, screams, the cries of warriors, all seemed to echo in their mind. They realized that recreating this armor would not be simple. It would be more than metal and tools. It would be a connection to the past, a link to the people who had worn it. And the choice of whether it should be clean or bloodstained was no longer a question of cleanliness. It was a question of respect, of history, and maybe even life or death. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, the human finally sat down, exhausted. They took a piece of the armor in their hands, a small, intricately designed gauntlet, and traced the marks slowly. Each line told a story. Each scratch was a warning. They whispered to themselves, "I will do this right. I will honor the past, no matter what it takes." And at that moment, something unexpected happened. A faint shimmer ran across the armor, like a pulse of energy. The human jumped back. The room was still quiet, but the feeling of being watched remained. They knew that the assignment had changed. This was no longer just a task. This was an encounter with history itself. And history was watching them carefully, testing them, waiting to see if they were worthy. The human understood one thing clearly. The path ahead would not be easy. Every mistake could be dangerous. Every choice mattered. And the mysterious question carved into the chest would not leave them alone. "Do you want mine cleaned or bloodstained?" With a deep breath, the human picked up their tools. Today, the first step would begin. The process of recreating the armor would start, and nothing would ever be the same again. They were ready, but in the back of their mind, one thought remained. The armor was not just metal. It was alive with a memory of battles long past. And whatever awaited them in the next steps, it would be more than they had ever imagined. The human leaned over the table, examining the gauntlet again, tracing the lines with careful fingers. Outside, the wind howled. Shadows shifted. The workshop seemed to breathe, and the human whispered softly to themselves, "Let's begin." The morning sun barely touched the edges of the workshop. Dust hung in the air, golden and thick, moving lazily as the human stirred. Yesterday had been strange, almost unreal, but today the work would begin in earnest. The chest sat in the center of the room, its dark wood glinting faintly in the morning light, as if it had absorbed the secrets of countless battles. The human knew that every scratch, every mark on the armor held a story, and stories, once forgotten, could speak again if someone listened. Carefully, the human lifted the first piece of armor from the chest, the breastplate. It was heavier than it looked, solid metal that had clearly seen the worst of wars. As their fingers traced the deep gouges and scratches, memories seemed to flicker across the surface. Images of battles long gone, warriors charging, blades clashing, shields splintering. The human blinked and shook their head, but the visions remained faint, like shadows in the corner of their mind. They took out a magnifying glass and examined the scratches closely. Each one was unique. One long scratch ran diagonally across the chest plate, deeper than the rest, as if a single sword had struck with deadly precision. Another set of dents suggested repeated hits, yet none had pierced through. The craftsmanship was not only strong, it was clever. Whoever had forged this armor had anticipated the worst of war, and the humans suddenly understood the weight of the task ahead. This was not just about creating metal protection. It was about capturing the soul of warriors who had once worn it. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the human's careful tools clinking against the metal. But the workshop had changed. The shadows that had seemed subtle yesterday now moved with intent. Small objects trembled on tables and shelves. The human paused, holding the breastplate. Something was off. A faint, almost imperceptible hum filled the room, like the distant sound of a heartbeat. "Am I imagining this?" the human whispered aloud, though no one answered. Then, a soft scratch echoed from the far wall. The human turned quickly. A long, narrow shadow slid across the floor, as if a figure had moved behind the shelves. But when they approached, nothing was there, only the old tools and dust, frozen in place. Yet the sense of being watched was undeniable. The human felt a shiver run down their spine, a cold that had nothing to do with the metal they were handling. Determined, the human pressed on. They laid the armor flat on the table and began sketching every detail. Each line they drew made the room feel heavier, charged with something unseen. The scratches on the armor seemed to guide their hand, as if the metal itself wanted to be remembered perfectly. By mid-morning, the human decided to investigate the hidden compartment in the breastplate. Yesterday, they had noticed a seam so fine it could easily have been overlooked. With gentle hands, they pried it open, revealing a folded piece of leather. The human unfolded it carefully. Inside was a note, yellow with age and splattered with something dark. Blood, perhaps, though dry beyond recognition. The words were written in an elegant hand. Only the worthy may wear this. Blood and honor are the same coin. Choose poorly, and the past will not forgive. The human swallowed hard. The message was clear. This was not just a task. This was a test. And the armor was more than metal. It was a memory of battles and warriors, waiting for someone who could honor it. As they sat back, a sudden gust of wind blew through the workshop. Despite the windows being closed, papers scattered, tools rattled, and for a moment, the human felt as though the ghosts of the warriors themselves had entered the room. One piece of armor, a gauntlet, slid across the table on its own. The human's eyes widened. The room was alive with the past. Every mark, every dent, every bloodstain told a story that demanded to be respected. Determined to continue, the human began testing the metal. They tapped it lightly with a hammer, listening to the sound. Some areas rang clear, bright, almost musical. Other spots absorbed the sound, dull and heavy. The difference was subtle, but it was enough to tell the human that each mark on the armor was deliberate. Not a single dent, scratch, or scar was random. Every imperfection had a purpose. The human realized that replicating the armor would not be enough. They had to understand its history, feel it, respect it. Every line they drew, every hammer strike they planned for later, would have to honor the battles the armor had seen. Late morning turned to afternoon. The human paused for a short break, wiping sweat from their brow. As they leaned back in their chair, they noticed something unusual. The chest, which had seemed solid and silent all morning, now vibrated slightly. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the human saw it. The lid quivered, and for a moment, the shadows around it grew darker, stretching toward them as if reaching. Heart pounding, the human approached cautiously. They touched the chest, half expecting something to leap out. Instead, it was still. But a new message had appeared, etched faintly on the wood as though it had been there all along, just waiting to reveal itself. The past remembers the touch of the present. Do not break what you cannot rebuild. The human felt a chill. Every word in the workshop seemed alive, as though the room itself communicated with them. It was clear this was no ordinary assignment. Every action, every choice mattered. The armor, the chest, even the workshop itself. All were part of a story that refused to be forgotten. Determined to push forward, the human picked up another piece of armor, a shoulder plate. They laid it on the table and examined it. On the underside, near the leather straps, were tiny inscriptions. The letters were old, almost impossible to read, but the human could make out fragments. Honor, sacrifice, blood. Each word seemed to echo in the room. The shadows grew longer, stretching across the walls and ceiling. The hum returned, louder now, a rhythmic thrum that felt like a heartbeat. The human realized that the armor was not just a relic, it was a witness, and witnesses remembered. Afternoon faded into evening, and the human had only scratched the surface of the armor's secrets. They took a deep breath, laying the breastplate and shoulder plate on the table. They could feel the weight of the task pressing down, heavy and insistent. But with the weight came clarity. They understood that the armor had to be recreated not just physically, but spiritually. To do it wrong would be to disrespect centuries of history, and the consequences, whatever they might be, were unknown. Suddenly, a metallic clang echoed from the far corner of the workshop. The human spun around. A small hammer had fallen to the ground, though nothing had touched it. But more than that, a faint red stain appeared on the wooden floor beneath it. The human froze. Blood? No, impossible. And yet, the stain seemed fresh, dark, and vivid in the dim light. The human's mind raced. Could the armor itself be bleeding? Or was it a warning? Every instinct screamed caution. They realized that this was not simply a challenge of skill. It was a challenge of courage, focus, and respect. Every step forward would be watched, every decision judged by a past long gone but not forgotten. As night fell, the workshop grew colder. Shadows seemed to gather closer around the human. They set down the last piece they had examined and stepped back, running a hand through their hair. Exhaustion mixed with awe. They had seen only a fraction of the armor's secrets, yet already felt alive, almost conscious. Before leaving for the night, the human placed the armor carefully back into the chest. They traced the carved words one last time. "Do you want mine cleaned or bloodstained?" Their heart pounded. This question had become more than a choice. It was a warning, a test, and a promise. Outside, the wind howled through the silent streets. Inside, the workshop held its breath, waiting for the human to return. They had glimpsed only a fragment of the armor's story, yet it had changed them. The past was no longer distant. It was here, tangible, and demanding attention. The human knew one thing clearly. Tomorrow would be the real beginning. They would start recreating the armor, but the work would not just test their skill. It would test their heart, their courage, and their respect for history itself. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, the whispers continued. The past remembers. Choose wisely. And with that, the human left the workshop, leaving the armor, the chest, and the shadows behind, at least a night. But the feeling of being watched, of history alive and waiting, would not leave them. The sun had barely risen when the human returned to the workshop. The air was cooler than yesterday, carrying a faint metallic scent that made their stomach tighten. They knew that today would mark the beginning of something far beyond ordinary craft. Today, they would forge the armor, piece by piece, not only replicating its shape, but honoring its history. The chest sat in the center of the room, its dark wood gleaming faintly in the morning light. The human hesitated for a moment, placing their hand on it. The carved question from yesterday still lingered in their mind. "Do you want mine cleaned or bloodstained?" The words seemed to hum, almost alive. The humans shook their head, trying to push away the unease. Today, skill had to outweigh fear. They opened the chest carefully and took out the breastplate first. The metal was heavy, cold, and smooth in some places, but rough and scarred in others. It seemed impossible that they could recreate something so perfect, yet so full of history. Setting the breastplate on the table, the human began sketching again, tracing every dent, scratch, and mark. Each line demanded their full attention. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch longer as the light shifted. For a moment, the human thought they saw movement in the corners of the workshop. A hammer, lying on the floor, tilted slightly as if pushed by an unseen hand. They shook their head. "It's just nerves," they whispered, but the unease clung stubbornly to their chest. The first task was simple in theory: melt the metal and form the first plates. But as soon as the human poured the glowing molten metal into the mold, a strange vibration ran through the table. The molten metal hissed violently, throwing small sparks into the air. The human jumped back, heart pounding. Something about this process felt wrong. The metal reacted differently than any they had used before. It was almost alive, responding to the tension and hesitation in their hands. Minutes turned into hours. The human poured, hammered, and shaped. Some pieces bent too easily. Others resisted, cracking under pressure. Sweat ran down their face as frustration mounted. The shadows in the workshop grew longer, stretching like fingers. Every time the human glanced at the armor, it seemed to shimmer slightly, almost breathing with a faint rhythm. And then it happened. A small piece of the armor, the gauntlet, began to vibrate on the table. The human froze, unsure if they should touch it. Slowly, they reached out, and the metal stilled under their hand. But the vibration returned stronger, moving up their arm to their fingertips. A whisper filled the room, soft, almost a sigh. "Feel it, respect it." The human's breath caught in their throat. The armor was speaking, or at least, it felt like it was. They shook their head, trying to focus on the task. This was no ordinary metal. Every strike of the hammer, every pour of molten liquid seemed to echo the battles the armor had seen. It demanded precision, patience, and respect. By mid-afternoon, the human had completed the first small plate. It looked almost perfect, shining like the original, yet somehow different. The shadows in the workshop flickered around it. For a moment, the humans swore they saw a figure reflected in the metal, a warrior, blurred and fleeting, as if caught between the past and present. The humans stepped back, their heart racing. Could it be fatigue? Or was the armor truly alive in some way, a vessel of memories and battle cries long forgotten? They took a deep breath and reminded themselves they had to finish the task, whatever it took. The next step was joining the plates together. The human carefully aligned the first breastplate with the shoulder piece. The metal seemed to resist at first, stiff and unyielding, but under careful pressure, it moved. Sparks flew as hammer met metal, echoing in the silent workshop. Each strike was precise, measured, and yet, with every blow, the room seemed to respond. A cold wind blew across the human's neck. Shadows twisted unnaturally, stretching along the walls. Then came the first real challenge. A section of the shoulder plate refused to bend properly. The human struck harder, and a loud crash echoed through the workshop. The plate buckled, a small crack forming along its edge. Heart pounding, the human froze. The crack was faint but noticeable, a mistake. And mistakes in this task, they realized, were not just physical. They carried weight, as though the armor remembered the battles it had endured and was judging their effort. The humans stepped back and closed their eyes. They took a deep breath, remembering the note from the hidden compartment. Only the worthy may wear this. Blood and honor are the same coin. Choose poorly, and the past will not forgive. They understood now. Every strike, every bend, every decision mattered. The armor was not just metal. It was a memory, a history, a witness. To forge it incorrectly would be to dishonor centuries of warriors. They adjusted their technique, softer now, letting the metal guide their hands instead of forcing it. Slowly, the plate began to align perfectly. Hours passed. The human worked tirelessly, sometimes forgetting hunger, sometimes ignoring the growing darkness outside. The armor gradually took shape, yet the atmosphere remained tense. Shadows swirled as though alive. Tools rattled without explanation. Faint whispers continued to echo. Honor, respect, blood. By nightfall, the first major assembly was complete. The breastplate and shoulder plate sat together, shining faintly under the dim workshop lights. The human stepped back, exhausted but satisfied. It was not perfect. No human work could match the exact memory of battles, but it was close. And then the moment of truth came. The human lifted the gauntlet and touched the assembled plates. The metal pulsed slightly under their fingers, almost like a heartbeat. A sudden chill swept through the room. Shadows gathered at the edges, and a low hum filled the air. The human's heart raced as the whispers grew louder. Blood, honor, choose, choose. The human realized what the armor wanted. It was not merely being forged, it was being judged. Every imperfection, every hesitation, every choice of touch mattered. The human's mind raced. The chess question from the first day returned with full force. Do you want mine cleaned or bloodstained? The human hesitated. Cleaning the armor would honor the craft, make it shine, preserve it for the future. Leaving the stains would preserve the brutal reality of battles, the sacrifices of warriors long gone. They could feel the weight of centuries pressing down, as though the ghosts of those who had worn it were standing silently behind them, watching, judging. A sudden movement caught the human's eye. A small streak of red appeared along the edge of the breastplate. They jumped back, heart pounding. Had they missed something? Was it a reflection of the past, or a warning? The hum grew louder. The shadows seemed to twist closer. And for a moment, the human saw a figure in the metal, a warrior, blurred but unmistakable, as if emerging from memory itself. Shaking, the human whispered, I will do my best. They adjusted the hammer and touched the metal again, working carefully, deliberately. Sparks flew, the air crackled, and the faint pulse under their fingers continued. Each plate, each joint, each connection was made with care, respect, and concentration. Slowly, the armor seemed to respond, settling into itself as though approving of the effort. Finally, hours later, the first attempt at recreating the armor was complete. The human stepped back, exhausted but relieved. The pieces fit together. The scratches and dents replicated faithfully. And yet, the workshop remained alive with whispers, shadows, and faint pulses. The human understood. This was only the beginning. The armor had memories yet untold, battles yet to be felt, and choices yet to be made. As they cleaned their tools and prepared to leave for the night, the human looked at the assembled armor. It gleamed faintly in the dim light, beautiful and terrifying. They realized something important. This assignment was no longer just a test of skill. It was a test of courage, respect, and understanding. The question carved into the chest would not leave them. Do you want mine cleaned or bloodstained? The human left the workshop, heart racing, aware that they had taken the first step into history itself. Shadows lingered behind them. Whispers faded but remained in memory, and the workshop seemed to breathe as if alive. The first attempt had been made. The path ahead would be harder, deeper, and more dangerous than anything they could imagine. And somewhere, in the dark corners of the room, the whispers continued. The past watches. The past remembers. The past chooses. The human shivered, knowing tomorrow they would return to the armor. But tonight, the first attempt had taught them a lesson. History is never just remembered. It is lived, and sometimes it demands payment. The workshop was silent, almost unnaturally so, as the human entered. The morning sun barely touched the dust in the air, painting golden lines across the scattered tools. The assembled armor from yesterday sat in the center of the room, gleaming faintly, almost alive. Its weight seemed heavier now, not in metal, but in the unseen memories it carried. The human paused at the doorway, feeling the eyes of the past on them. Every scratch, every dent, every bloodstain whispered in a language older than words, a warning, a challenge, a plea. Yesterday had been the first attempt, a trial of skill. Today would be the test of heart. The carved question on the chest returned to their mind, louder than ever. Do you want mine cleaned or bloodstained? It was no longer a simple choice. It was a moral decision, one that could honor the past or erase its memory. The human approached the armor carefully, touching the breastplate. The metal pulsed faintly under their fingers, like a heartbeat. A cold shiver ran down their spine. Shadows seemed to gather at the edges of the room, twisting, stretching, forming shapes that almost resembled warriors in the distance. Faint whispers filled the air. Blood, honor, blood, honor. The human's hand trembled. They had spent countless hours yesterday forging the armor, copying each scratch, each dent, each scar. Now, the choice of whether to clean it or leave the stain seemed almost impossible. Cleaning would make it perfect, pristine, a work of skill. Leaving it bloodstained would honor the battles, the lives lost, the sacrifices made, but it would also feel heavy, uncomfortable, even frightening. They knelt beside the chest, brushing a piece of dust from the carved words. Only the worthy may wear this. Blood and honor are the same coin. The human whispered to themselves, I have to choose, but how? The workshop seemed to react to their indecision. Tools rattled softly on the walls. A faint wind blew through, though no window was open. Shadows danced across the walls in a way that seemed intentional, almost like the room itself was alive and watching. The human's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed caution, yet curiosity and duty pulled them forward. Slowly, they picked up a cloth. The first instinct was to clean the breastplate, to make it shine. But as the cloth touched the metal, a sharp sensation ran through their fingers, like a jolt of energy. The whispering voices grew louder, overlapping now. Blood, honor, respect, respect. The human froze, realizing the armor reacted to every action. It was testing them, judging their intentions. A sudden movement caught their eye. The shadow of a figure appeared behind the chest, tall and imposing. But when the human turned, nothing was there. Only the faint outline of the armor, reflecting light, strangely, remained. Breathing heavily, the humans stepped back. Their mind raced. Could they really clean it? Would that erase the sacrifices of the warriors who had worn it? Or did leaving it bloodstained preserve the truth, at the cost of comfort and beauty? Every option carried weight, and the workshop seemed to press it on them, insisting that the choice be made carefully. The human picked up the breastplate again. The faint pulse beneath their fingers had grown stronger, more insistent. And then they saw it. Tiny red marks on the metal shifting slightly, like fresh blood appeared and disappeared with the movement of light. The human gasped, stepping back. The whispers intensified. Choose, or the past will judge. Choose. They realized something terrifying. This was not just about the physical armor. It was a test of understanding history, of respecting those who had fought and bled. Every hesitation, every thought, every small doubt could affect the armor. It was alive in memory, alive in consequence. The humans' hands shook as they lifted the cloth again. Their minds swirled with images, warriors clashing in open fields, arrows piercing shields, cries of agony, triumph, and courage. The metal beneath their fingers seemed to vibrate with those memories. They understood now. The armor demanded acknowledgement, not perfection. The choice was about truth, not beauty. Taking a deep breath, they decided, slowly, deliberately. The human laid down the cloth and touched the breastplate directly. The red stains, the scratches, the dents, all remained untouched. The human whispered softly, "I honor your battles. I honor your sacrifice. I will not erase you." The workshop seemed to react immediately. Shadows grew taller, but calmer. The faint hum in the air shifted, becoming a steady, rhythmic pulse, like approval. The armor beneath their fingers felt warmer now, almost alive in gratitude. The whispers faded into a low, content murmur. But the test was not over. The shoulder plates, gauntlets, and helmet awaited the same treatment. The human worked carefully, piece by piece, leaving every mark as it was, feeling the weight of history in each motion. Sparks flew from minor hammer adjustments, and the faint pulse beneath their hands guided them. The armor was no longer just metal. It was a story unfolding under their touch. Hours passed. The sun sank lower, casting long golden beams through the workshop. The human's back ached. Hands were sore, yet they continued. Every scratch left, every dent preserved, felt heavier than any piece of metal. They felt a strained connection to the warriors who had worn this armor centuries ago. For the first time, the human realized the choice of blood or honor was not about metal. It was about empathy, courage, and respect for lives long gone. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the wall in the shape of a figure striking with a sword. The human froze, heart pounding. The shadow paused, then slowly faded. A whisper followed. "You are learning, but the past is not done." The human's pulse quickened. What else could the armor demand? What other test awaited? They felt a chill, almost like cold fingers brushing across their neck. But they pressed on, working with care and intention. Each plate fit perfectly, the dents aligned, and the scratches mirrored the original. The weight of history pressed upon them, but it was no longer fear, it was respect. By nightfall, the assembly of the armor was nearly complete. The humans stepped back, breathing heavily, and surveyed their work. The armor gleamed faintly in the dim light, but was far from clean. Every scratch, every dent, every faint bloodstain remained intact. It was a living memory of battles, a tribute to warriors who had come before. And then, the workshop changed again. The faint pulse beneath the armor grew stronger. The shadows on the walls shifted into shapes of warriors frozen mid-battle. The whispers returned, but softer now, almost like gratitude. "You have chosen well. You honor the past you understand." The humans stepped back, awe and exhaustion mixing together. They realized the armor had accepted their choice. It was no longer just a task. It had become a connection across centuries. The whispers faded. The shadows relaxed, and the pulse beneath the metal softened, as if the armor itself breathed a quiet sigh. But as the human prepared to leave for night, they noticed something unexpected. A small, faint scratch on the breastplate seemed to glow subtly, red in the dim light. The human knelt down, running a finger along it. For a brief moment, they saw the flash of a battle. The clash of swords, the cry of a warrior, the sting of defeat, and the taste of victory. Then it vanished, leaving only the cold, solid metal beneath their fingers. The human whispered, almost reverently, "The past is alive, and it will never be silent." They left the workshop carefully, closing the door behind them. Outside, the night was quiet, the wind still. Yet the memory of the workshop lingered. The armor waited, alive with history, with blood, with honor. And the human knew deep in their heart, that tomorrow would bring another challenge. They had made the first moral choice. They had chosen honor over cleanliness, truth over comfort, but the path ahead was still uncertain. The armor had more secrets, more tests, and more whispers yet to reveal. The human could only prepare, knowing that every strike of the hammer, every decision, would be judged not by skill alone, but by their respect for history itself. As they walked away, the faint hum returned one last time, low and steady. A whisper lingered on the wind. The worthy will endure, the past watches, and it remembers. The human shivered, but for the first time, they felt a strange confidence. They had stepped into history, chosen wisely, and survived its first test. Yet deep in the shadows of the workshop, the armor pulsed softly, waiting for the next step. The next day would come, and with it, the final trials of skill, courage, and understanding. The workshop was darker than usual, though the sun had barely set. Shadows pooled in every corner, thick and heavy, twisting across the floor and walls like smoke. The human entered quietly, their breath shallow. The armor lay in the center, fully assembled now. Each plate glinted in the dim light, reflecting more than the physical world. It seemed to carry centuries of memory, battles, and unspoken stories. The human stepped closer. The faint pulse beneath the armor was stronger now, almost like a heartbeat echoing in the chest. For the first time, they felt it not as metal, but as something alive, something aware. The shadows along the walls shifted slightly, as though waiting. The air itself seemed thick with tension. Yesterday, they had made the moral choice, to leave the scratches, the dents, and the bloodstains intact. Today, they would see the consequences of that choice. They knelt beside the armor, brushing a faint layer of dust from its surface. The whispers returned, soft but distinct. You have honored, you have remembered, but the past is not yet done. The humans swallowed hard. They could feel the weight of countless warriors pressing down, not physically, but through the armor itself. The metal seemed to breathe beneath their fingertips, each plate vibrating slightly as though reacting to their presence. Slowly, the human touched the breastplate. The faint pulse became stronger, rhythmic, like a living heartbeat. Then, the workshop changed in an instant. Shadows along the walls elongated, converging into shapes. Figures of warriors frozen mid-battle. Faint, ghostly glimmers of swords clashing, shields splintering, and arrows whistling to the air filled the room. The human's breath caught. It was real, or at least it felt real. They realized that the armor had not only witnessed history, it was bringing it into the present. The past was alive, and they were standing inside it. The humans stepped back, trembling. They had prepared for forging, for challenges, for moral decisions, but nothing could prepare them for this. The whispers grew louder, now overlapping in multiple voices. Blood, honor, sacrifice, courage, truth. A cold wind swept through the workshop, though all the windows were shut. Papers fluttered, tools rattled, and the faint pulse beneath the armor quickened. The humans' hands shook, but they reached forward again, guided by a sense of responsibility they could not ignore. As their fingers brushed the gauntlet, a flash of light shot across the room. The human recoiled, but when they looked again, the armor seemed to shimmer with a faint red glow. The shadows on the walls now moved with intention. Figures of warriors stepped out, ghostly but distinct, as if emerging from the armor itself. The human realized what was happening. The armor was alive with memory. Every strike, every dent, every bloodstain had been preserved, and now the past was fully awakening around them. One warrior stepped forward, spectral but solid in presence, sword in hand. They raised it toward the human, not an attack, but as a gesture of acknowledgement. The whispers coalesced into a single, almost audible voice. You have honored us, but now you must witness. The human's heart raced. Every instinct screamed fear, yet curiosity and duty held them in place. They took a deep breath and knelt closer to the breastplate. The glow beneath their fingers intensified, and suddenly, the memories of battles filled their mind. They could feel the clash of metal, the sting of arrows, the roar of warriors charging. Pain, courage, victory, and loss all coursed through them as though they were living it themselves. The workshop seemed to dissolve around them. Shadows twisted into full battlefields. The human could see the ancient warriors wearing the very armor they had just recreated, fighting fiercely. Some fell, some stood triumphant. Every dent and scratch they had left intact was alive with history. Every bloodstain was a testament to bravery. The human whispered softly, I understand. I see now." The spectral warriors paused. The room returned to quietness, though the faint pulse beneath the armor continued. The human's hands were still on the breastplate. The glow slowly dimmed, and the whispering voices softened. "You have preserved the truth. You have honored the fallen. You are worthy." The human exhaled, trembling but filled with awe. They stood and circled the armor, examining it in the dim light. It looked like ordinary metal again, but they knew better. It was alive with the memory of centuries, and their hands had connected the past to the present. Suddenly, a soft crackle echoed through the workshop. A faint shimmer ran along the edges of the breastplate and shoulder plates. The armor moved, imperceptibly at first, then with more force, as though adjusting itself for wear. The human realized at the start. It was reacting to their presence, almost as if the armor itself were alive. The chest question returned, not as words, but as a feeling. "Do you want mine cleaned or bloodstained?" The human's mind returned to their choice from yesterday. They had chosen honor over perfection, truth over comfort. The armor's subtle movement now seemed like approval, a silent acknowledgement of the decision. The human reached for the helmet, the final piece. As they lifted it, they felt a strange warmth. The whispers returned, gentle now, almost like guidance. Wear it, understand, remember. Carefully, the human placed the helmet on the table and traced its markings. Every dent, every scratch, every faint bloodstain seemed to tell a story. As they touched it, a vision flashed before their eyes. A single warrior falling in battle, yet standing proud in the end. The human blinked and gasped. The vision lingered for a moment, then disappeared, leaving only the cold, solid metal beneath their hands. A sudden thought struck the human. This armor was more than a relic. It was a teacher, a vessel of history, and a bridge across time. Their hands had not just forged metal, they had forged understanding, empathy, and respect. The shadows in the room shifted once more. The human could feel the eyes of the past upon them. They stepped back, heart pounding, and whispered aloud, I honor you. I will not forget." The armor pulsed one last time, a slow, steady beat, like a heartbeat settling into silence. The glow dimmed, the shadows returned to corners, and the whispers faded. The workshop was silent, but it was a different silence, heavy with history, with respect, and with life preserved. The human exhaled, exhausted but exhilarated. They had completed the task, yes, but more importantly, they had connected with the past in a way no one else could. The armor was perfect in truth, alive in memory, and honored in every scratch, every dent, and every stain. As they packed up tools and prepared to leave, the human looked one last time at the fully assembled armor. It seemed to hum softly, a faint resonance that could almost be heard with the heart. They whispered to themselves, "The past is not gone. It is here, and it will never be silent again." Stepping out into the night, the human closed the workshop door behind them. Outside, the world was quiet, the wind calm. But inside, history breathed, memory lived, and the armor waited patiently for the next soul brave enough to listen. The human walked away, feeling a strange peace. They had faced the past, made the right choice, and survived its tests. Yet deep in the shadows, faint pulses and whispers lingered, a reminder that history is alive, and those who honor it carry its weight forever. One last whisper followed them into the night. The worthy will endure, the past watches, and it remembers. And with that, the story ended, not in finality, but in the living connection between past and present. The armor had revealed its secrets, and the human had chosen honor over convenience, courage over fear. The workshop waited silently, ready to tell its story again to whoever dared to listen next.